Hello. So we are going to do a snowscape painting today, which is different from other landscapes that I've done in the sense that a lot of it is going to be white. So we're not necessarily going to be painting on every single inch or centimeter of this painting. And we have to be really strategic about where our shadows go, since we have to leave that highlight of the snow pure white of the paper. So it's going to take a little bit of planning. So let me switch over. I've already got a pencil sketch ready to go here, but I'm going to go in and make those marks a little bit darker so that everybody can see them. And I'll just sort of point out all the different features I have. So back here we have a mountain range. So we'll have a little bit of a tone in the sky. And this is water. So this is sort of the horizon line we're working with. And then we have a couple of smaller hills sort of in the background that will sort of cascade into the water here. And then we have, so coming back up, we have the water comes sort of in front of the second mountain or hill. And then we have a little cabin here. They've got a fire going. And then we have a couple of trees, one over here, 3 on this side. And then just mounds and mounds of snow sort of in front of all those trees. We've got a mound of snow in front of the house. This driveway. There's snow sort of piled up on the side of the road, and we'll sort of show once we actually start painting that this is like feet of snow. That's how thick they've sort of cleared out for this driveway. So as always, we're going to start from the very back. I'm going to work with a fairly large paintbrush at first. I'm going to work with my size 14 round to get this a pretty even tone in for the sky, and then the mountains are going to be a color, and it'll be pretty faded back here, and then as we come back up, the colors will intensify a little bit. So I've got some clear water. I'm not worrying about the tree branches quite yet. The sky will be completely dry before we start painting those trees. So I am trying to be conscious of not going into those mountains that much. I don't want these to blend too much, and I want there to be a stark difference between the sky and the mountains. So for right now, just getting the sky wet. And when you think about snowy days, it can either be really bright or really dreary, right? So I think I want mine to be a little bit on the brighter side, like it's really sunny out. Other than it having just snowed, it maybe feels a little warm if you're all bundled up. So that is sort of the feeling I'm going to portray here. So there will be parts of the painting that are blues, icy cold, and then there will be other parts of the painting that have a little warmer of a tone. So what I'm going to come to here, maybe it's like sunrise, the sun is coming up. So I want a little bit of pink in my sky. And then we'll blend that pink into sort of a lighter blue. So I'm just putting that pink down. And then I have a brighter blue, which is just a really diluted cobalt. I'm not adding anything else to it. And then I'm going to come in with that blue and help blend the boundary of that pink I just put down. I'm going to dilute that blue even more as we go further up into the sky. So that's sort of my really simple sunrise color palette. So next up, oh, and sorry, when I started painting, I switched over to my size 6 round so that I can really get a good sort of thin pink border around those mountains. Okay, so the mountains themselves, I am going to pre-wet the mountain, and if you touch the sky a little bit and that pink comes down into the mountains, that's fine. We do want a little bit of that color to be reflecting off of some of the snow on the mountains or just the peaks of the mountains, so that's quite all right if some of that color blends in. And I'm actually going to bring this clear water that I'm using to pre-wet my paper, I'm going to bring that down into the water as well because I want to get a good reflection of these mountains. But I'm not going to go all the way down. I'm probably just going to go down to where this mountain sort of meets the water down here. And then that's probably where I'm going to want my colors to start intensifying a little bit once we get closer to the viewer. Okay, so now you sort of want to pick what color you want those mountains to be. So I'm going to go with still blue. Still, cobalt is going to be my main color there, but I'm going to add just a teeny bit of red so that we get a little bit of a purplish tint for those mountains. So here's my cobalt, and then I'm going to dip into my sort of magenta, but not pick up too much of it. But as you can see there, it just turned that bright blue just a little darker and just a little more purple. So I'm going to start sort of at the top line of those mountains. I'm going to leave a little bit of like a white band just to show that there's some highlight on the top of the mountain and or snow. And maybe once you get into the valley of those mountains, there's less of a white highlight. There we go. And why we're pre-wetting our paper here is because we want this color to sort of ebb and flow wherever this water is telling it to go. I don't want this to be one even tone of color. I definitely want some areas to be darker than others, which if you pre-wet your paper will sort of determine which areas it wants to be darker and which areas are lighter. You can help it out a little bit, obviously, by just putting more paint down in certain places. But at the drying stage, it's going to look very different once it's dry. And that's what we want. So what I'm also going to do is try to mirror those same shapes down into the water here. But I want the edges of my mountains here to be a lot fuzzier. So I'm going to come along with clear water and sort of help the edge of that blend away just a little bit. There. All right, so the next thing we need to figure out is what color we want to be most prominent sort of in this middle area. One key thing about painting is if you shift your colors, that'll create depth. So you don't want this same purple to be happening down here because then it'll look like those colors are on the same plane. So every color that you've used so far, at least in the background, these are the very distant objects in our painting here. So we don't want to use these colors again. Or, we can still use the base of what we used here, but we have to add something else to it to make it a different color. So what I'm gonna do sort of in this middle ground is maybe get my blue to be a little bit more vibrant. So you can do that by adding, cobalt, or if you have ultramarine, whatever blue you have, you add it back into the purple that you created here. But you can also just make it less diluted. You can just have more pigment in this mixture that you're using. So the blue, the brighter blue I just created, I'm going to use that on the mountain here, but for the water itself, I think I want my water to be like a little bluish green. So I'm going to mix up cobalt again with a little bit of light yellow hue. And then that'll be the color of my water. But I don't want it too green. I don't want it to look like dirty swamp water. I just want a little bit of hint of green. So I'm going to mix some blue back in there. All right, and then what I'm going to do, again, I'm not paying attention to where these trees are just yet. These areas are going to be dry once we get to start painting the trees. I'm going to come in where this water is, but I'm going to leave like a white band so that we can start to show some icy areas in the painting. So I'm going to leave some of this area white, and then just pop in this just slightly green color into this water here. I'm even going to pull this up to meet the mountains, just so that it all looks like one continuous body of water. We might need to come back in and reinforce the reflections of the mountains, but that's quite all right. Watercolor is all about going back and forth. Sometimes you want to paint when your paper's wet, and then sometimes you really don't. The only way to get really sharp details with watercolor is to paint on dry paper, but that comes much later in the process. For right now, we want to focus on the wet on wet technique and just getting a lot of colors down fairly quickly. In an attempt to sort of get our color palette decided on, which obviously you can decide on before you start painting. Some people find it's just a little bit more fun to figure that out while you're actually painting. Because even if you figure out your color palette before you start painting, your mind might change. So I'm going to bring that water all the way over to this side as well. And again, I want that color to sort of intensify the closer it gets to your viewer. So I'm going to mix a little bit more of that teal that we want for the water. And I'm just going to make it as it gets closer. And also we want that contrast, right? Like this is going to be a big pile of snow. We want what's behind it to really set it off and have a lot of contrast. Okay. So like we said, I was going to use this blue for the mountain here. So I'm going to come in, and this is really where you want to figure out where your light source comes from. We sort of did that with the mountains, but the mountains are so huge, it doesn't really matter where the sun is. There's going to be parts of those mountains that are fully in either shadow or highlight. But once things get closer, we really have to figure out whether our sun is over here, whether our sun is on top. You know, when you're doing a landscape, just figure out where that, for objects that are close up at least, you really want to know where that sun is at. So I'm going to imagine our sun. I think the way I sort of did the mountains is this side of the mountain is in shadow. So that means that my sun is over here. So what that means now is and you can let this sort of happen organically, but we need to figure out sort of the undulation of these mountains here. So obviously things that are faced away from where we say our sun is, that's going to be in shadow, and this very diluted cobalt blue is what I'm using for that shadow. There's also this little ridge. This little bit is going to be in shadow. And then this side as well. I am going to leave a little space for, we have a little smoke coming out of the cabin here. I do want to leave a little space, pure white, so that we can come back and play around with the smokiness of that area later on. But you know, this hill isn't just one big hill and that's it. There's hills sort of inside of it as well. So trying to organically have some highlight still on the shadow side of this little hill. Just like we need some shadows in the big highlight side as well. So just, you know, this is going to just come with practice, how you go about doing that. I'm just trying to like skip my paintbrush around, miss some places, put shadow down in some places, and try to make it look somewhat realistic. And this is a space that can have quite a lot of layers. You'll probably see me go back in with more blues, or maybe I want the blues to have a little bit of yellow or pink, you know, because the sky has that. So we're gonna, this isn't done yet. Actually, no areas of the painting are exactly done yet. We're right now, like I said, we're just trying to get a lot of color down at once. So that we have a sense of where our light source is and all the different structures in our painting. So since I used that blue in the middle there, I want to create a different blue for the snow along this driveway and then the big mounds of snow in the very front. So what I want to do with this blue, since I already have like a greenish blue up here, I'm going to mix in just a touch of orange, just so that it's still blue, but it dulls the blue down just a little bit. But what I do want to do is I want to have a thicker mixture. So I don't want this color to be as diluted as it was in the background here, because as things get closer to you, to the human eye, the colors get more intense. So actually that turned out really well. So I think I might shift to purple, but like a reddish purple, not a bluish purple, for the snow in the foreground. But again, that purple is gonna get more and more intense. So this purple is different from, so the mountains were mostly blue with a little touch of red. Now we have what feels very clearly purple. So it's gonna be different and a lot more intense than the mountains up here. What I am gonna do though is I'm gonna pre-wet And this might be hard for you to see what I'm doing, but at least if you're doing it on your paper, you'll see exactly where the moisture is going. I'm going to come in pre-wet areas so that when I do put down this shadow color, it's leaving a lot of spaces pure white that won't get touched. Obviously, we can play around with the shapes of these when we do a little bit more layering, but for right now I want large areas of this snow to not be touched at all. And my clear water is not so clear anymore since I've been mixing up all these blues and purples, but that's fine. It's helping you to be able to see what I'm doing right now, and it could help you as well. To know exactly where you're putting your water. And the trick here is I'm going to come back in with a really intense color and just drop it in. And then it's going to do some really sort of wonderful things on its own as it dries. And I'm trying to create a lot of different surfaces. Like here I have some white that is clearly, I'm not touching, I want to leave white, but everything on the right side of that sort of mound of snow is getting this water treatment, because that is in shadow, because our sun, I'm imagining the sun being as far away as the mountains, so anything that is a surface that feels like it's facing you as you're painting, that will get covered in shadow. And same with the house. I'm going to go in and try to create some shadows on the house. And then we'll come back in with actual color, but I find it's nice to at least put some shadows down first. That way when you layer color over it, those shadows will come through those layers. So we have those two dormers that are in shadow. We have a little porch on this side that's in shadow. And then probably the rest of that has that highlight from the sun. Okay, so never mind that. I'm going to just focus on this middle area along the driveway and the house. I'll work on this big mound because this is going to be a whole different color because I want it to look like it's the closest thing to me. So I'll just work on the mounds of snow over here. And the trees will probably be the last thing we do, just because those do have to have quite a strong color just because it's a tree bark. So I want to get all the delicate stuff first, and then we can play around with colors that are a lot more intense. So this tree is probably casting a little bit of a shadow, so we can paint that in. And this is still, I'm just putting down as clear as water as I can get. I'm still going to come in and drop in really strong color in just a second. I just want to make sure that I'm getting everything that I think deserves a shadow, getting those in. So like this big mound of snow is going to be casting a shadow onto the driveway itself. So I'm going to paint that in. And then these tire tracks are going to have some shadow. And we can make them a little more textured the closer it gets to the viewer, because by the time the car's all the way over here by the house, we don't really see a lot of detail in the tire marks. Same thing for this side. And I'm really trying to show that these are like deep tire tracks. And you do that by sort of making the tire track sort of convex. The tire tracks have a curve to them because it's pushing snow out either way, away from the tires. And then those tire tracks will just get bigger the closer they get to you. All right, so I think that's where most of my shadows will lie. So I'm gonna go into my purple, sort of load up my paintbrush, and a lot of these shadows are sort of connected. So if you drop down some of that color, it's just gonna start bleeding into that full shape of water that's all connected. I have some isolated shapes, so those will get a little extra attention. But again, the beautiful thing about watercolor is this is going to dry and it's going to sort of do its own thing while it's drying. So you'll get some really beautiful textures and sort of outlines where the pigment dries. And I know some folks have trouble because this is the you don't have control over what your painting is doing stage. But I think once you start doing this a whole lot, you'll appreciate all the little things that watercolor does that you can't really recreate when you're trying. It just happens because of the nature of the paint. And I'm still using my big brush here because I'm not going in for like super small details right now. So the bigger the paintbrush, the better right now, I think. So next thing I'm going to do is just sort of see if there's any of this color that I want to blend a little bit more. I mean, right now, since we sort of told the paper where to go by pre-wetting the paper, if there are areas where you want a little bit of a more blurry boundary between the shadow and the highlight, you can go in and with clear water to sort of blend those in a little bit more. Okay. So again, we have all sort of icy cool colors, right? But they're all a little bit different. We have the purple that's a little bit more blue up here. We have a blue that's a little bit more green. We have a blue that's just really diluted blue that doesn't edge towards green or purple or anything else. And here we have a warmer purple because it has a little bit more red in it. And then here I want to do a green blue that's a little bit more green than the water. So again, we're going to have many different levels, and the quickest, easiest way to create those levels is just make every level just a slightly different color. Okay, so with the same thing I did with the purple, I'm going to come over here and imagine again, so my sun maybe is right directly above this big mound of snow instead of like, so this big mound, the sun was sort of off to the side. I'm gonna imagine that the sun is right above this one. So all the little sort of deeper crevices of this snow mound is gonna be in shadow, leaving the tops of things with the highlight. And some of that purple is bleeding into there. Don't be afraid of that. That's going to happen. Okay, and then I want, because this is so close to me, I want the sort of bottoms to be darker. So I'm going to put bottoms, I mean sort of the bottom of the frame. Just because it's a nice visual when sort of things around the edge get just a little bit darker than what's inside. It sort of pulls your focus to the center. I'm not necessarily, I don't want to pull focus to the center, but I do want the color on this mound of snow to just be a little bit more intense. And again, that's going to be achieved by lots and lots of layers. This is only our first layer. So things will get more intense sort of with time. You can't do it all at once. Okay. So while everything down here is drying, and if you see that some of your paint is like puddling and you feel like it's not going to dry anytime soon, but you want to get on with painting, you can just come in with a tissue and just sort of soak up. Obviously, that's going to pick up a lot of your color as well. But again, if we're going to be doing multiple layers, you can come back and intensify that color instead of just waiting for it to dry. So yeah, my purple pooled up quite a bit, so I picked up where it was getting a little too heavy. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to come in along this horizon line and just make it a touch darker. I do want the water and mountains to have sort of a clear separation. So I just mixed another kind of greenish blue. But I'm going to come in and just sort of reinforce the horizon line. And it's not just a straight line. I'm doing them in sort of short, or I guess sort of still long, maybe strokes that are a couple inches long. Just again to show that maybe this is water that hasn't frozen over yet. And maybe there's still some waves happening. Also in this area, because I think it got blown out a little bit, it's not as intensely colored as I would like. So this is also an attempt to sort of just make that area just a little bit darker. Okay, and then you also get the texture of some waves happening back there. Okay, so now might be the time to start introducing complementary colors. This is all very cool and lovely, but we're also on the ocean. There's going to be rocks, so I want to mix a sort of a brown, but I'm going to keep it sort of cool brown. I want a lot of this to feel cool. I am going to come back into these highlights with a little bit of that pink sort of haze from the sky, but I'm not going to do that quite yet. I'm going to come in with, so this is a mixture of burnt umber and some cobalt, just to make it, it's still brown, but it feels like a cooler brown, and it sort of fits in our landscape here. So what I want to use this brown for initially are these little rocks that are going to be out in the water here. These rocks also probably have some snow on them, at least if the water is calm. So I'm going to leave a little bit of white space to show that these rocks are a little snow covered. And depending where you are geographically, you know, the kinds of rocks that are sort of butting up against the water here, you can have them be big bubbly rocks, or they could be sort of slated straighter lines. I'm going with the straighter lines just because we have so many, you know, what look like rock formations up here but are actually snow. I want to have a little bit of a variety in just sort of brush strokes. So I'm just going to have linear strokes to represent the rocks here. And I'm going to bring that into the little hill here. Maybe this hill is mostly just a big rock formation. But again, it's covered in a lot of snow. And then, since I imagine there'd be a little bit of a beach area here, I'm going to come in and put a little bit of land down that definitely has been hit with water, so it's not as covered in snow as the rest of the landscape. But then I'm going to leave all the snowy highlights that I did here. I'm going to leave that alone. I'm going to keep doing this sort of linear texture behind the tree. No, sorry, behind the house and behind the trees. Just so that we get a sense that, again, not all of this is covered in snow. And we get a sense of sort of what this material is back here. So you can see just by adding maybe a warmer color into our landscape here, it creates a little bit more depth. Like this looks pretty far away. And once we get more complementary colors going on down here, it'll look like sort of a real life landscape. Okay, so for the house, since it's on a sort of a different plane, it's closer to us. I'm going to warm up that brown just a little bit with a touch of red, not too much. So I'm going to come in, like the color of the house is this sort of warmer brown color. But we're still going to have some areas in highlight. So the chimney, I'm going to kind of leave alone. I'm going to leave that white. And that's where I'll put sort of this pink of the sky. I'll put that into the chimney. But here I'm just layering, since this house I'm imagining is this brown color. Again, like I said before, we already have the shadows down of where we want the shadows on the house. So now we just have to come back in with like the actual midtones, the color of the house. And then the roof I'm keeping white, obviously, because it's just snowed. So I'm going to come back in actually with a little bit of that purple I used again, and I'm going to create sort of a ledge, like that snow is a couple inches tall. Sort of create a ledge around that roof. Okay, and I think now is a good time to sort of address this smoky area. So I'm going to get some clear water and just sort of re-wet where I want this sort of smoke to go. Because any color that I want to put down right now, I want it to blend in quite a lot to the background. So we'll just pre-wet that area. And this is tricky. It's sort of similar to painting a cloud, right? Where you want some irregularities. You don't want strong boundaries. You do want to give off that sort of misty texture. So now I'm just sort of going in and putting a blue down, and it's mixing with that water that I already put down. And then I'm going to come back in with a tissue and sort of pick up a lot of what I just did. I'm just trying to make the area around it sort of hazy right now, trying to pick up some of the watercolor that had already been put down and dried. So I'm just doing that with clear water, coming in with the tissue to dab it all off. And then we can come back in with some color and try to create some sort of shape for this smoke. But again, I don't want the edges of it to be that strong. Some sides of the smoke probably don't even need any definition because it's dissipating so much. So you can do this by just sort of dabbing color around in a somewhat random way. I want to create some sort of shape, however irregular it is, but then I'm always going to come back with a Kleenex and just sort of lift off so that any edge I did try to paint in there just softens just a little bit. And then I'll come back around the smoke with a little bit more detail, just so that we don't lose all the detail that we just put down as far as like the linear rocks go. But yeah, creating this texture just takes a lot of layers of back and forth and back and forth. So I might even, because right now it seems to all be sort of contained right where the highlight of that mountain is. So maybe I want it to come up past the mountain a little bit. So what I'm doing here is just, I have clear water. I'm going in sort of round circular motions just to agitate that paint just enough to come off. So yeah, so then that sort of shows that maybe the smoke is rising. It's not just neatly contained exactly where that highlight was, because that sort of starts to look a little too planned, a little too unnatural. So here now we have that smoke really coming up past the top of this mountain and extending beyond. So again, we can come back in once this dries a little bit to refine some things, but that looks good so far. Okay, and then you want to just start feeling for any excess wetness. I do now at this point want to start painting some of those trees in, so just make sure, and just by tapping it lightly, don't do, I knew it was dry, so that's why I did full palm, but for you guys at home, just do one little, maybe your pinky finger will help you feel if the area you want to paint next is dry or not. Okay, so as far as our browns go, we went with a sort of cool brown that we added blue to here, and then we added a little bit more red to the brown for the house. So now I want a really warm brown, a rich brown. So I'm going to use some burnt sienna. I'm going to mix in just a touch of Grumbacher red. Maybe a little bit of light yellow, because I really want this brown to stand out and pop off of all these blues. So I want a brown that seems a little bit more orange. Because that'll create some really good contrast. Okay, so what we want to pay attention to now with these trees is, again, they are going to have some highlight on it. So I'm going to sort of run my paintbrush along the side where the shadow is. So for me, that's going to be my right side. And I'm not filling in the entire trunk. I'm leaving the left side sort of blank. Because these trees are so skinny, there maybe not a whole lot of snow has gotten caught in these trees. Or at least since I didn't save a whole lot of white space for these trees. Just going to imagine that there's no snow on these guys. And then you can sort of start to embellish and create more branches than you actually drew before we started. Trees are a nice sort of therapeutic thing to paint. And again, we're going to need quite a few layers on this tree. I mean, you can see that horizon line clear through the tree. So we'll work on layering these once we get them all down. Again, I'm leaving the left side of the tree blank right now, or transparent at least. You can see all the water past it, but we'll build that up with more layers. Again, right now we're just putting down some shadow. We can come back in with midtones and highlights. And then I would just try my best to make these trees look all fairly different. You know, have branches coming off at different points of the trunk. Just having a variety of structures of trees will just make them look a little bit more realistic. This one maybe has a shadow that then comes back out to a highlight. All right, so I'm going to do the same thing for the tree on this side of the house. And I had already sort of filled out the bottom here with a shadow that the brown can just sort of lay on top of and just get a little bit more richer in color once you start layering, which is a technique called glazing, where you just have multiple layers of watercolor all building on top of each other to create a new color. Okay, so while those trees are drying, I'm going to come back in and try to reinforce this sort of smoky area again. I'm going to get some blue. Come back in. I do want this sort of smoke to seem like smaller at the bottom, and that it's just getting bigger and bigger the higher it rises. So most of my sort of reinforcing the shape here is just going to happen at the bottom. And then there's probably, some of that mountain is showing through this smoke. So I'm going to come back in with that blue color just diluted a bit more. Like that. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to do while I'm waiting for my trees to dry is those trees are casting some shadows, so I want to create those coming down. So I'm going to try to recreate this sort of teal green that I used down here, but then make it just a little darker. Just so that it feels a little bit more like a shadow. So maybe this shadow is coming down. It's sort of breaking this highlight here in half. And then there's a little branch coming off. Maybe that also breaks that highlight. Okay. And then this tree comes straight down. So it's going to break up this little highlight. And then same with this one. But I'm not going just straight down. I'm going to try to abide by all the different surfaces we have here. So this is sort of at a semicircle. This shadow stopped and sort of fell behind this mound of snow, but then reached back up and curved over that next one. So we're going to try and do that with each of these trees, while also observing that the sun is right above them or right behind them, and that's why they're casting their shadows this way. So we still have an overall direction that we have to go in, but it's going to be going over lots of different surfaces. We can sort of do the same with the house. Some of the ground you can still see. So I'm going to cast a little bit of a blue or a purple shadow on the ground of the house. And then maybe make so this house has like 5 posts or columns on the porch. I'm making the spaces in between those posts darker so that even there the porch has some more depth. I'm going to get these sides of the chimney. So there's 2 chimneys on this house. Only one has a fire going, I guess. We'll just make sure both of the sides of the chimney are in shadow. I'm also going to come in with, I guess I'm going to use this color that we use for the trees up here, since this driveway sort of drives up to this color. I'm going to sort of glaze the teal shadow color that we used for the trees. I'm going to also use it on this sort of embankment of snow that sort of builds up when people drive by, just so that that shadow stands out a little bit more. I'm going to do the same in the tire tracks, but only on this side of it, just so that, again, it just has some depth. That one side is a little bit darker, a little bit more cooler than the other side that starts to face the sun once it reaches up in the middle there. Same thing on this side. All right, so I'm going to do sort of the same up here, just so that our shadows have a little bit more dimension. I'm going to add that green teal color to all the other shadows that we did in purple. But I'm going to stop once I get to the house. I think the house and anything beyond doesn't get this sort of green sort of accent color. Okay, so the only thing left, I think, because I'm trying to keep this video down to an hour, is just to keep layering the brown of the tree, just so that you don't see any of the lines behind it. This might take a while, depending on how thick of a mixture you paint with. And then, how intense your colors are in the background. I'm going to attempt to do just a couple more coats, just so that we can get trees that just feel a little bit more solid. And you don't have to retrace every single part of the tree. Like some of these branches up here, I'm just going to leave sort of translucent, because what I really want is just the trunks of the tree to feel a little bit heavier. All right, and then our tree over here. I started mixing a darker brown just because I want these trees to stand out a lot more. So again, you can increase the intensity of the color you're working with, but you can also just have it diluted less than you normally work with. And that will sort of intensify your colors pretty quickly. Sort of create more tree limbs out here. All right, and then the last thing I'm going to do, just so that this area feels like it has more depth, is I'm going to sort of put a wash over the driveway that will sort of blend out to pure white, and that'll just show that this driveway is sort of fading into the background, and by fading I mean it's getting less like stark white than it is up here. And I might do the same with some of the whites that are back here. I want the pure stark whites to sort of live up in the front here. So going through and dulling down the whites just a little bit in the background will help make the foreground feel a lot brighter. And that can help you create like another layer that maybe you didn't pencil in before. So yeah, so maybe this is more beach ground, and then where I've left the bright white barrier, that snow that's a lot closer to the foreground. All right, so the last thing I want to do is come back in with that pink that I used in the sky to create a little bit more of it. And I want this color to sort of live in some places where I want the highlight to really stand out, or just in places where I want your eye to go. Like obviously the house is a focal point, so I want that pink too. And this I'm going to try and keep as diluted as I can, but still being able to see that pink. I'm going to put it right on that fireplace. I want to put it sort of on the roof a little bit as well, on this other chimney. I'm going to put it back here in the rocks just a little bit. Maybe on the pure white of these mounds of snow, they'll just get a little hint of that pink. The ones over here. And then the tops of our little snow mounds here will get a little bit of that pink as well. And then if you do have, you can put a little of that, bit of that pink in the trees. Okay, I think that is my complete painting. Let me see if blocking out some sunlight, you can see it better. It gets a little bit more intense, I guess. But there we go. The focus here again is leaving spaces of your painting, the pure white of the paper, untouched. But you can see we can always sort of, and it depends on your painting, but you can always go back in and lift off some of that color. Not all of it is going to come back off. But this is it's a fun exercise for me because you sort of have to learn how to paint in reverse, because the white that you're leaving the blank of the paper is the most essential part of a snowscape. So I hope everybody enjoyed that.